Hi, welcome to Literature Space, and this is the first episode in the course on the history of English literature. When we study the history of English literature, it is difficult to trace as it is believed to have different starting points. Some believe that English history began with the Norman conquest of 1066 AD, while some believe that we need to trace back to the Anglo-Saxon period. There's another argument which states that we have to go back to Celtic invasion to point the beginnings. Hence, we begin with the Celtic invasion. 5th century onwards, Celts and Gaels migrated massively to the island which we now call England. This island was invaded by Romans repeatedly and around 55 BC and 1 AD. Thus, the history of English begins even before the arrival of English people who arrived during the Anglo-Saxon times. The Anglo-Saxon period, which is also known as the Old English period, began after the Romans. Visigoths, the German invaders, forced Romans to withdraw their legions from England as the German invaders attacked Rome. Around 407 AD, Roman legions were withdrawn, which left England defenseless, and resulted in the attack from different tribes like the Picts and the Scots. This was the point when the Germanic tribes Angles, Saxons and Jutes arrived as mercenaries from the eastern coast of Europe to protect England from the Picts and the Scots. But, Celts were making a mistake, as they didn't realize that they were asking help from the invaders against invaders. Over a period of time, Angles, Jutes and Saxons came and settled across England, that's in Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia and Wessex, and dominated the island. The Celts, who lived with the support of Romans, were moved to the areas of mountains and Wales. Hence, when Germanic tribes defended Celts from Picts and Scots, they also ended up driving out original inhabitants of the land. Hence, the Celts were taken over by Anglo-Saxons and Jutes. But, we don't get to hear much about Jutes later. So the next question which arises is, was there any resistance from natives against Anglo-Saxon invasion? Well, yes. It was. King Arthur, who was in the defense of Britain during Anglo-Saxon invasion. There have been a lot of debates, but he is known to live between 5th century and early 6th century. His persona is described in many folklores and legends, especially in 1130s by Geoffrey of Monmouth. But it is still debated whether he was a real king or just a fictional character. Now you all must be thinking, what did Anglo-Saxons do after settling in England? Here's what they did. They established 5 kingdoms, aka heptarchy, which consisted of Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, Wessex and Kent. There were 4 main dialects among these kingdoms. Northumbrian, also known as the first one to produce literature. The other 3 dialects are Mercian, Kentish and West Saxon, which eventually gained supremacy and became the standard dialect. Thus, we find King Alfred, the King of Wessex from 871 to 899, who united rest of the kingdoms under his supremacy and also led the British army against the Viking invasions, the violent and ruthless invaders. There were 2 Viking invasions during Anglo-Saxon rule. 787 First Invasion. 866 Second Invasion. When the Vikings descended in East Anglia and were moving to Wessex, King Alfred announced himself as an Anglo-Saxon king and defended England. Later, he also encouraged education, literature, and art. After King Alfred, there was no such king who was able to unite the Anglo-Saxons. In 876 AD, Britain fell into the hands of Danes, and there were many invasions till 1013 AD. This was the time when Danes occupied most of the land of Mercia, East Anglia, and Northumbria. The Danish attacked the English every year from 980 AD, till the conquest of 1016 AD. The attacks resumed in 1066 and finally the rule ended in 1085. This was called as Danelaw, and it has influenced the modern language as well. The end of Anglo-Saxon period. Many big events happened in 1066 AD. The first one was the end of the rule of Danes in 1066, and one more big event which happened in 1066 was the Battle of Stamford Bridge. This battle destroyed the Viking invasions and almost 4,000 to 5,000 Vikings were killed. Later, in less than 3 weeks, England was attacked by the Normans under William the Conqueror, also known as William of Normandy, who believed that the Danish were not capable of preserving their throne. England was defeated. Harold Godwinson was defeated and was the last Anglo-Saxon king. This is also known as the Battle of Hastings or the Norman Conquest. It is marked as the end of Anglo-Saxon period as well as the starting point of Norman rule and the French influence. Here are some important points that you might want to take down from today's lesson. Feel free to pause the video. It is important to understand that some historians argue that the history of English literature begins from the Middle English period. But the language and literature began to evolve from Old English period. Hence, it is important to know poetry and prose from the Old English period, which we will be covering in the next lesson. Do remember that this is just the beginning of learning and there are a lot of books based on the history of English literature. I hope these videos help you. You can also post your doubts in the comment section. Do like, comment and subscribe. See you in the next class.